provide you where the enrollment we're currently at. As you can see, in March, the preliminary number was 6487.12. So it dropped a little bit from our February number, but that's a preliminary number that Rosemary is still before she submits it to OLPI. So we're continuing with the same trend line as our 15-16 school year. We had a little bit of a bubble in February, but then it's dropping back down just a little bit. So we'll just continue to monitor that. Also, we're starting our projections for our next school year. We're going to continue to work on that because the projections are coming a little bit lower given our the tool that we use. And so we want to make sure that we have a realistic, very conservative number because as you remember, we're about 154 students less than what we budgeted. The budget that cost is about $2.7 million this year. Regarding our apportionments, levy, and other revenues, again, this is a running total. I just keep showing September, October, November, we're to February. This is the month end for February. You can see what the monthly apportionment was, $4.8 million. Our levy collection is only 132. In March, it'll be right around there, and then in April, we'll have that $3 million, around $3 million that we'll receive. And then the other revenue, that's food service, facility usage, those type of things. You can see the total revenue, $6.8 million. Our expenditures were $7.1. We actually only went over $254,000 this last month. And one of the reasons is because there was an accounts payable run that we ran it on Wednesday, and it didn't get posted until March 1st. And so that number would have been a little bit higher with accounts payable. But you can see in the net change fund balance for this year right now, we're only at $109,000 negative. However, look a year ago at the same time, we were positive $1.1 million. That's a $1.2 million swing from one year to the next. So that has a direct impact on our fund balance. So we'll continue to just show this to the board each month so you can kind of see where the revenues and expenditures are falling out and how that impacts fund balance. So if you take a look at the fund balance, when we were looking at where the trend lines were going to be, at the very top you can see it's 8.7 million. That excludes New Market Skills Center. That is pass-through money. Okay? Running Start is really pass-through money too also. Okay? But we show $8.7 million, a decrease of 227 from the prior month. March, we'll see where that comes in at. It's a bigger, a longer month, so we'll have a little bit more of a reduction in fund balance. But if you look at the trend line, we did cross in February the prior year fund balance, excluding New Market Skills Center. In March, we'll probably cross the second year. We will not probably recover from that because of the McClary fix and the $1.50 that we can only collect. Any questions on the fund balance? Or any questions on any of those three slides? Okay. So I'm not going to go into our 4-year forecast. I'm still working on that. But I do have, this next part is the Budget Audit Committee. So again, I just want to share with you what we looked at, and what I could say it was a committee, but I met individually, you know, with especially two of the individuals that are here, right, Alan Jones and Scott Keith. But we looked at the budget process and how we develop our budget, look at enrollment, how we determine staffing levels, you know, the types of revenue that we receive, both state, local, and federal, the enrollment and the impact of that, when we, you know, estimate too high or too low, the impact of that. District's budget assumptions that we made on our 4-year forecast. We used a 4% growth in our property values. So the 4-year forecast, we went through that in detail, the fund balance, levy impact and the changes of that to our district. Regionalization experience factor that this district did not receive. And then the community support and the public perception and awareness, trying to talk about how we're trying to communicate some of this. So what I want to do is introduce Alan Jones, who spent 11 years in my position as the finance person at Tumwater School District. And Alan came in and did his own analysis, and he's going to talk about that. And then Scott Keith's going to come up and talk about some of the budget committee, some of these topics, and what he's been doing. I mean, Scott and I have been on the phone many times. He's been at my office many times. I know Alan's been in my office getting data downloads. He's a data guy, okay? So anyway, I'm going to leave it to Alan at this time. So I'll go to this next slide. Oops. Excuse me.
It's pretty small print up there. Is this on?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me here. It's great to see this great turnout too. I calculate this is my 265th Tumwater School Board meeting. And it seems like just last month that I was here, but it's been 5.5 years. When Jim asked me to participate, and John asked me to participate in this, I didn't know what I had to contribute, but after meeting with Jim, I felt what was needed was really an outside look, an independent look that's not biased by any of the assumptions and decisions that you've been making. And since I'm working right now temporarily for Clover Park School District, I'm using the methodology, a forecasting methodology that I shared with them. So I just took the template that I'm using with Clover Park, used the same assumptions, and plugged in tumwater values to calculate the current year ending fund balance and the future revenues and expenditures. And this print is awfully small. You have hard copy in your packets there, so I'll try to, look, that's the advance and the tweak here. One of these is light. I don't know which one. There it is. Okay, so if you bear with me, I'll just go through what this is and explain the methodology. I call it the worst case scenario, but really what it is, it's the current law scenario, assuming the legislature doesn't bail us out in some way. It's what the current law would produce. So in the first column there, you see the actual 2017-18 revenues and expenditures and ending fund balance. And this 4.9 includes New Market Skill Center, like Jim's last presentation. The second column here is the projected current year revenues and expenditures. And for doing that, I just used, for simplicity, February apportionment and the current levy lid law. State funding is 93% of the money that you get if you count the levy lid. I mean, the state controls 93% of the money you get. And so those formulas are all in place and they're not changing anywhere for this year. So using February apportionment, that's a pretty solid number. Things aren't going to change that much from there on. And I more or less just carried forward the other federal and local revenues. That produced revenue of about 88 million. On expenditures, I took the February year-to-date expenditures and compared it to last year's February year-to-date expenditures, assumed the same trend. So I'm sure that's a different method than Jim was using, but it's worked for me quite often. Now, if there's differences in year-end and one-time expenditures, you have to adjust for that, and I did do some adjustment for one-time expenditures. But it produced this number, 91 million roughly. So that would be a spend down of about $3 million. And that would take out of your 9.4 million, and leave you with about 6.3 million, which is still above your 4% threshold. That number goes into the beginning of your next year's budget. Okay, for next year, I used the current apportionment formula with February's value. So I didn't change anything about enrollment or anything. I just used your February apportionment enrollment, other values. I plugged that in with the current funding formula, assuming a 2% salary increase for all employees, a state-funded salary increase, a 3.1% inflation, and basically that's it. And it produced these numbers, 8.8 million in revenue. Notice that's only a 0.3% increase. And notice that the local effort assistance declines by over 100,000, and levy declines by 3.1 million. That will happen if they don't change the levy lid. On expenditures, I forecast future expenditures based as a percentage of the current year. So I assume 2.5 salary increases as your actual salary increases for next year for all staff. The health benefit increase is increased in proportion to the new SEBB funding rates, and the others, benefits are 5%, everything else at 2%. So that's a baseline, a simple explanation of how you can calculate a number, and it gets you to this number of 96 million, which is a $7.8 million spend down. That means you would actually be broke at the end of the year. That red number is the number you would be in the red. Now, are there any questions about that before I go to the next page?
Jay? Yep. I wanted to just clarify the projected ending fund balance for this year. You have it at 6.3 million, and our 4% is 3.5. So that difference of 2.8, that's our new market and our tied up money and our spoken for stuff, or what is the?
Yeah, okay, good point. Yeah, we do a little fine tuning to take them out, but they're all in this now, including their fund balance, so, yeah, this is an approximate number, but that, you're saying the threshold is now 3.5%?
No, I just wanted to clarify if that 2.8 million that is not the 4% threshold, because that's our minimum
Right.
rainy day, that is encompassing a lot of the funds we can't touch in our fund balance. The
Right,
stuff that we have to keep in there, right?
Some.
That's
Some.
correct, yes.
Okay,
And that includes the skill center's share of
Right.
the fund balance.
I mean, we can't just take that and use all that, is what I'm trying to say.
That's correct.
Okay,
But I guess the other point to make is any savings you can achieve in the current year is gonna help you with the next year.
right, no,
That's-
I get it
yeah.
carries over, I wanted to clarify what that extra 2.8 million was.
Okay, if we go on to the next slide, it shows some projections about what we might expect from the legislature. And, how do I advance to the next slide here? Is that?
Right around.
Okay. Got it. Okay, so this worst case, that's what you saw on the previous page. The ending with, the negative ending fund balance. But we hope that the legislature will help us out. One thing they can do is delay K3 class size compliance. My estimate for the impact of that is $355,000. You're already closer than most districts to getting to the 17-to-1 class size in elementary and in K3. So you don't benefit as much as some districts might, but it would be several teachers that you wouldn't have to hire in order to get full funding. The second column there is special ed factor. If they increase the funding factor to 1.0 from 96.09, that would generate about $263,000. So these are additive. So as you go through the columns here, each one gets you to a little better position. But even after those two changes, you're still negative after those two changes next year. The thing that could really help you is the levy lid, because you've got twice as much levy, voter-approved levy, as you have levy capacity. And I don't recommend going down that path. It's going back the path that we've been down of the state not funding basic ed, but it's what would help you. Raising the levy lid 50%, which is roughly half of your uncollectible amount, would produce, it would produce about 4.4 million, but 2.3 would be in the coming school year, because it spills over 2 years. So it would help you about 2.3. So finally, with that change, you would get to the black. And the final item there is, if they delayed the SEBB health benefit changes, that would save you about $500,000. So if all those things were done, you'd be able to end the year in the black, still below your minimum fund balance of 4%, but in somewhat better shape. So I don't think we can count on all of those. We probably can't confidently count on half of them, but I just threw this out so that you'd have that for reference and kind of a frame of reference. So that's what I had to say. If you've got questions, I'd be happy to take them. And let me say that I felt what was needed was a totally independent approach to this. So even though I've been meeting with Jim and he's helped me with data, I used a methodology that was my own.
Question, comment?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, very much.
The first one? Okay.
Now I want to introduce Scott, to have him come up and have him provide us some information on his perspective on the budget committee and some of the things that he was looking at. And I can tell you, Scott did a very thorough look at everything from levy to enrollment to the apportionment. We sat in my office and went through things in very detail, explaining the apportionment and how it works in state government, the prototypical school model. So,
Thank you. So I come from this perspective. I'm a private business owner in the community. I'm a taxpayer in Tumwater. I have 4 daughters who go through the Tumwater schools. I recognize a lot of faces here as teachers and people who have done great things for my kids. I came from this from the perspective of I wanted to make sure that I was comfortable with how the budget works in Tumwater and other schools. I was frustrated last summer because I felt like the labor dispute was based a lot on projections, and people, the district and TEA, both kind of used projections to their advantage when it came down to things and for their bargaining positions. So I sat down with Jim, I met with some OSPI people and got on the OSPI website. I met with Elizabeth Collins from UNISERV and tried to gather all the data I could. And I won't say I forced my way on the budget committee, but I volunteered and I sent John a couple emails and Jim a couple emails. I guess I'm to the board and said, hey, let's be involved in this process. And I think my initial job was to figure out, is there anything that an auditor would look at this and say, if there's anything fishy? Is there any money missing? Is anybody being deceitful? Anything like that? And I concluded pretty early on that that wasn't the case. School budgets are nice because they're very predictable, they're very public, they're based on enrollment and some numbers that we get from the state, which is pretty nice. There's not a whole lot of discretion on the income side of it, a little bit more with the expenses. So I came at it from that perspective. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to sit down and kind of vet the budget process and see if Tumwater, had a deficit, because that was one of the big issues. TSD saying we're going to have this big deficit and things are going to change. And so I want to figure out if that was the case. I learned clearly under the school funding model things have changed, and the state is dumping more money into this district for the state BEA funding, but we're losing the levy money that we would have, the Tumwater citizens have already approved, which is very frustrating as a taxpayer. I know there's a bill up on the Hill right now that kind of would deal with that, but basically Tumwater citizens are not allowed to contribute to our schools as much as we would like to, which is very frustrating. But it is what it is. So I wanted to figure out, how do those numbers match? We gained some under the state funding model, and we lost some under the levy model. How do those things match up? And the answer I learned was it's really dependent on enrollment. Under our current enrollment that we have, about 6,500 kids, we're going to be down about $3 to $5 million. That's just how it is. There's a gap. If we operate the same way we operated last year, this coming year, we're going to have about a $3 to $5 million deficit. Well, what's frustrating for me is that's really hard to figure out because our general fund balance, which is really our savings account, is the exact same now as it was a year ago or year before. It's actually more. I think it's about $1 million more than it was the last fiscal year. But the point at which we are going to not receive the income is in April. We usually would get $7 or $8 million. We're going to get $3 or $3.5 million this year. So we have to adjust, and that appears on the school district fiscal year, which operates from September 1 to August 31. So we clearly have about a $3 to $5 million shortfall in that area. Now I say $3 to $5 million because it's really dependent on enrollment. We get money per kid in Tumwater, as does every other state, every other school district in the state, and then we also have the levy fund from the taxpayers of Tumwater, that live within Tumwater school district boundaries. So when I went through it, I think the assumptions that Jim used were reasonable. Are they accurate? Are they actual? I don't know. We'll know when the kids show up for school next August. I don't know. And there's lots of variables that affect that. Some of it is how many out-of-district kids come in. We don't know that, right? We know how many kids live within boundaries. We don't know how many are going to come in. how many kids are gonna move out, move in, those kinds of things. But I can tell you, I think the assumption for the property tax increases and the tax base was reasonable. I think the assumption for the amount of kids we're gonna have here is reasonable. I would note that Jim and I was really flummoxed because TEA and Tumwater School District each put out projections, and Tumwater had its projection at 6,200 kids, which is obviously not accurate, and TEA had its projection at 7,000 kids. And TEA was using the OSPI website for its projection. Neither of those were accurate, and they were both kind of talking about these budgets that, in my view, were really fictional. But once we kind of narrowed it down, we figured out if we have 6,500 kids with our current staff, assuming we want to keep our same class sizes, our same teacher to staff ratio, it's going to look, we're going to be about $3 to $5 million short at the end of the day. So, I don't know what else anybody wants me to add. If there's questions, I'm happy to take them. I enjoyed sitting on the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to sit on the committee. I learned a lot. I want to thank Lori. I met Lori tonight for the first time. I've made about a dozen public records requests that she has dutifully answered and given me the information I needed. And I've used them, as some of you know, on a blog that kind of produces some of this information. So that's been very helpful for me and very educational. So I appreciate the opportunity to serve on the committee.
Thanks for the Scott.
Yes, Rita?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you, but also, this budget committee, because like probably almost 20 years ago, I was on the budget committee when they kind of first started looking at those things, and then there was really a lot of interest, and they kind of did a budget 101 to kind of get you, because it's a complicated process. But as the years have gone by, people have lost interest in that. And I just feel like that's a really important thing that the district keep up. So having gone through this process, do you have any suggestions how we can get more people on that committee and get more input from all different areas?
Yeah, I do. I think that would lead into my topic, which I think I've emailed the board on and tried to kind of make some suggestions. And that I think that the missing piece in the Tumwater community is buy-in from a stakeholders meeting. Tumwater School District is going to make these decisions, right? You guys are going to make these decisions on what's going to happen, and you're receiving input from other parties. You go and meet with the principals. You go and meet with TA. You go and meet with this. What I think is missing personally is kind of a roundtable discussion where we all sit around and we all talk about things, because frankly, this is like a family budget where I think that we've lobbed off all the fat. Now we're going to need to cut a little bit of meat. And all of us have something in this, and we all have priorities, we all want certain things to happen. But I think that discussion is only effective if it happens as a community, because you sitting down with me, I can tell you what my priorities are. You can sit down with somebody else and they can tell you what their priorities are. But I think all of us need to get in the room and say, well, yeah, I think we should kind of do these things. And I'll give an example. I know the school district sent out a survey recently that was very helpful and informative, but it was only kind of surface information that it asked me, do I like teachers better than athletics? Yes, definitely. I definitely like teachers better than athletics. And I'll use an example from my life. If you came to me and said, though, here's the deal, Scott, we can eliminate all of the athletic programs, right? Or we can add 2 kids to each classroom. I would say, I want you to add 2 kids to each classroom. Now, I may be in the minority, I may be in the majority, but I think we need to have that discussion, because just because I like one thing over another on a survey doesn't mean you really understand what my priorities are. And I think we can't even really figure out our priorities unless we talk about it as a group. So I would encourage the district within the next 60 days, because I think that's when really tough decisions need to be made, to invite people to a roundtable type of discussion, all the interested parties, and figure out how we really want to do this as a Tumwater community.